Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Weekly Notice with Andy Ngo. We are on episode 18, and today is the 28th of July, 2022. Um, I am going to start off with um, going back to Minneapolis. Minneapolis has become uh, really one of the hotspots for radicalism, far left radicalism in America. If you live there now and travel through, it may not be surprising. We saw a lot of violence there, obviously, after George Floyd died. But it wasn't that long ago that Minneapolis was a more moderate liberal place. In the really rapid transformation of this Midwestern city in, Minnesota, nice Midwest, into this place where there's just a steady stream of far left militant activism. It's quite shocking. I That's an area of the United States that I don't personally know very well. Um, so I still need to look into and try to better understand how did this transformation happen. Although I suspect that it's really similar to like other places, areas in the United States where certain core institutions just get captured, education, um, culture, and immigration has a big effect as well on that. And then you have the increasing dominance of one political side that then has control over um, to do whatever it wants, city council wise. I mean, Minneapolis was one of I think, the first place in the US after George Floyd died to say that they were going to abolish the Minneapolis Police Department. That didn't end up happening, but they did choose to defund the police department there. And like other cities in America, they are now still dealing with the surge in violent criminality and homicides there. Um, Please leave your questions and comments and respond to one another throughout the chat, interact. I think that type of interaction uh, with each other is actually really helpful. Um, you'll probably recognize that there are a lot of familiar names that are showing up weekly now. So, okay. Um, Dave Chappelle, the comedian, is currently doing a tour of the United States. He's become surprisingly this for many conservatives a a free speech like a hero. And Dave's humor, going back many years, it hasn't really changed. It's always been quite provocative on a number of issues like race and sex. When I was a child, I really liked the Dave Chappelle show. Was that on Comedy Central? I think it was. I even bought some of the DVD sets, I remember. I liked his humor. He went away for a number of years, and he's now back in the public eye and has angered a lot of people on the mainstream left and the far left because of his rather mild jokes about transgender and transsexual people. And the reactions against him have mobilized in the form now of calling for his shows to be canceled on Netflix and protests outside of his various live speaking events. And there's been a number of protests. Unfortunately, in Minneapolis last week, the theater um, that was the venue that was supposed to host his event, it was called First Avenue, I believe, ended up canceling. There was a call in and mass email harassment campaign, and reportedly some of the theater itself had been allegedly threatened. And they gave in and they apologized to the public, said that essentially that Dave's comments are hurtful towards the trans community and all this BS. And so it was moved to a new venue, and um, well, the protesters, which included far left militants and Antifa, showed up at the new venue, and there were a number of arrests. So I'm just going to go through them a little bit and then talk a little bit more about who some of these people are. Um, so Rachel Lee Bean was one of the people who was arrested. This was on July 22nd, Friday, and this is outside the Dave Chappelle event in Minneapolis. And Rachel Bean has a history of far left militancy going back years now, as early as 2015, around the not George Floyd, Michael Brown stuff in Ferguson, which was really kind of how BLM really blew up into a international movement. And she was arrested on probable cause charges of first degree assault, which is a serious felony, and riot. I looked into her background. This is from the Hennepin County jail roster, by the way. She was eventually released without having to pay bail or anything, and the charges will have to be formalized by prosecutors. Another photo of Rachel Bean. She's a very outspoken far left activist, militant, protester, whatever you want to call her. This is from her website. She wrote, "My name is Rachel Bean. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white, fat, disabled, queer, pivoting out of direct social service work after becoming disabled by long COVID, blah, 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 blah." Very predictable stuff. Her profile on Twitter and elsewhere, her blog is just filled with pleas for cash donations. She says she's disabled because of long COVID. Another arrestee is Natalie Rizzo Slaughter. This was a screenshot from video of her arrest. She was arrested on suspicion of vandalism, damage, mutilate, defacing exterior surface by carving or graffiti. And also a far left activist. Another arrestee is Sheridan Ann Lair. Probable cause, yes, also vandalism here. 27-year-old woman. This is a mugshot from another arrest at a different thing, so this is an older photo. But unsurprisingly, with these far left militants, they are, they go from one protest or riot to the next, and they just do it. And a lot of them are on public assistance, or they're students living off student loans, which are funded by taxpayers like you and I. This is her social media. And here's a post from her. "Hi, friends. Some of you are very kind and want to send money for jail support. I have a misdemeanor charge for destruction of property, also known as sidewalk chalk, and I do plan to talk to the NLG and get it dropped. But if there's fines, I'll share my Venmo then." So she posted this on the 24th of July, 2 days after her arrest. And this is quite telling here, right? A lot of people offer to give her money for being arrested. So there's a generally with these type of far left direct actions, there can be an incentive for money. And we're not talking about like George Soros type money type stuff. It's about these far left militant networks where the Cash App and Venmo accounts are like shared. Like they say, "Hey, this comrade was arrested, send them money." And some of them, are sent hundreds and thousands of dollars to get whatever their bail money and all that covered. And here as well, she talks about the NLG, which is the National Lawyers Guild. I've talked about them before on this podcast, but they're the far left legal group, historical ties to American communists. Today, they're very closely tied to Antifa, and they provide pro bono legal help. They provide bail, um, and yeah, they also use lawfare, which is like going after people through the law, like lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits, or tying up various opponents through lawsuits. They do that as well. So another arrestee was Rosemary Julia Coburn. This is the and she was arrested on suspicion of, let's see, riot, fleeing a police officer, and obstructing the legal process. All of them, by the way, were released without having to pay any bail. So, I mean, this is Hennepin County. That's where all the George Floyd stuff happened. So, they have, in my view, a compromised criminal justice system there as well. So back to Rachel Bean. I co-wrote a report with Katie Davis Court at the Post Millennial. And here it is, headline: I S-word my pants, wrote felony assault suspect from anti-Dave Chappelle Minneapolis protest. So with these career protesters, career far left militants, how they are able to sort of maintain it is that they maintain this lifestyle of going to different places to protest and rage or allegedly riot or be violent allegedly. They're able to maintain it because there can be a steady stream of money, and that money can come through welfare, like public assistance. Rachel Bean has been talking about her application process to be on permanent disability. Others, are just unemployed, so then they get it just as a matter of being below a certain poverty line for whatever state they live in. And then, of course, they do the fundraising through Cash App and Venmo and GoFundMe at times. So this report highlights one of her past blog posts. So she had written, and this gives actually good insight into the minds of these career far left militants. She wrote about a unfortunate experience of being incontinent at her work during the pandemic at the beginning of 2021. She wrote a blog post, and she said that let's see, pull it up. Here it is. So she says the exact time, the day, and where she was when she S-word her pants. What was really kind of weird here, though, she says that her partner, also a trans activist, offered to bring her new clothes, but then she declined it, and she stayed in the clothes that she defecated in. And this is actually really, I mean, this is not about mocking her for having a medical condition of incontinence. Incontinence is where one is unable to control bowel movements or urination. But this is kind of like an interesting insight. The next paragraph, she blames long COVID, and she blames capitalism for this unfortunate experience of what she's dealing with now. And these people who have this constant rage with the world, like they find blame in America or white supremacy or the right. They just find blame in something that where there's like otherwise no connection, and that type of rage drives them to do what they do, whether it be allegedly rioting or doing other crimes. And their whole worldview is full of um, paradoxes and inconsistencies and contradictions. Like they will call for the abolishing of the system, so-called system. By that they mean America, its state institutions. Excuse me, I just burped. Sorry. Live. They called for the abolishing of the system while benefiting the most from it, actually, through all these taxpayer funded uh, means to live off other people's money. And so this report is about her writings. She, yeah, was at Ferguson years ago, back in 2015. Um, she's also an outspoken activist for fat rights, and her blog post is just about how her life is really hard under the system. And um, I had become aware of Rachel actually back in 2020 because she was one of the people who helped fundraise for this criminal takeover of a Sheraton hotel in Minneapolis after George Floyd died. This actually didn't get a lot of attention nationally because it was in the context of neighborhoods being burnt down, and there was just so much chaos going on that this was kind of completely missed on the national media scene. But at that time, um, what had happened is that this Sheraton hotel was evacuated by its management and closed up, locked, and then rioters, looters, and homeless people broke in and completely took it over to create this enclosed autonomous zone. And people fundraised for it using GoFundMe. And Rachel Bean at that time was one of the militants who was organizing that type or helping to promote that fundraising. And um, you're probably not surprised to hear that within a very short amount of time, uh, 2 weeks, this autonomous zone hotel, which they renamed the Sanctuary Hotel, became a drug den and a place of sex trafficking and other violent criminalities, shootings outside that area, and police. They received dozens and dozens of 911 calls from the people who lived nearby, and eventually, the occupation was cleared out. I'm gonna pull up some video to show you how badly these extremists had trashed the place. Let me pull up the video. Okay. Yeah, so this is in June of 2020. But just this is just one of the rooms in this hotel that Rachel Bean was fundraising for this occupation. But this is what happened after the place was cleared. Look at that. Every room looked like this. You can imagine how much money it took to clean and to repair this place. Doors completely smashed up, hypodermic needles on the ground. Yeah, so Rachel Bean, who's arrested outside that Dave Chappelle event, fundraised for this to happen, by the way. Um, and that was just a mini microcosm because at the larger scale in Chaz in Seattle, that autonomous zone, it looked like that as well, but on the street. So this is what their ideology of these revolutionary anarchist communists leads to. It leads to what you see there on that video. It leads to what you've seen in Chaz, the people dying there as well. And um, this constant, reality from the hammer still doesn't wake up the adherents of this belief. They just believe that the reason why it didn't turn into a success story is because, the system oppressed them somehow and didn't allow it to fully, um, reach its conclusion, which would have been a utopia. Um, Tim Pool spoke about the report I did about Rachel Bean, and he summed it up kind of well and provided good commentary. So I'm going to play a little bit of it So I liked what he said. I thought it was interesting.
Having problems pooping, and she's probably losing her mind with rage, and she directs it somewhere. Dave Chappelle's a bad person. That's an outlet for my anger. I don't know. Maybe he could write music or play drums. Here's the story. The Post Millennial writes, the far left suspect that was arrested on suspicion of felony assault and rioting during a direct action against Dave Chappelle is asking for donations after claiming she's disabled and incontinent from having long COVID. Incontinence is not listed as a known symptom of those who have recovered from COVID-19, according to the CDC. Right, but if this is long COVID, maybe. Rachel Lee Bean, 35, was arrested on probable cause charges of felony first-degree assault and riot after far-left activists tried to shut down Dave Chappelle's comedy show appearances in Minneapolis. The far-left activists accused Chappelle, who is black, of transphobia and racism. They first threatened First Avenue Venue, who canceled the show before targeting the Varsity Theater for hosting his remaining shows last week. Other far-left activists arrested outside the theater on Friday included Natalie Rizzo Slaughter. I don't care about who these people are. Bean's far-left extremism across the U.S. goes back years to as early as 2015, where she traveled to Ferguson, Missouri in support of Michael Brown. The man, we know about that. I don't need to read it. In a post in January 2021, Bean detailed her new experience with incontinence and blamed it on capitalism, saying, I literally ished my pants at 11:56 a.m. on Wednesday, January 13th, 2021. I got myself cleaned up, and then I went back to work and finished the workday like that was totally effing normal. Things to have, like a normal thing to have happen. She says she's declined she declined to change into new clothes. I had fully absorbed that ishing my pants was just one of many mild to moderately itty days one could have in a pandemic while dealing with long COVID under capitalism. Okay. In another blog post from November 2021, Bean opines about food shortages and blames the middle and upper classes. Would our backyard gardens grow with more vibrancy if we had guaranteed income? Perhaps there would be an abundance of food and it wouldn't be compressed into the overfed mouths of the middle and upper classes. Perhaps there would be enough for everyone. I mean, I just want to point out this woman is obese. I don't know who she's talking about.
Yeah. So, yes, that sums up Rachel Bean very well. The report, this perpetual victim, and one who has advocated for a number of things that have harmed communities that she purports to advocate for. Going to Portland again, there's never a week where there isn't some type of violence or death happening, unfortunately. And things right now, I think it's unprecedented for Portland. So last week, Mayor Ted Wheeler declared a state of emergency because just before that, an outside agency that was commissioned by the city to do a report on findings about data on all the shootings and homicides that have happened in the past few years. And I mean, there's been more than 200% increase in the number of homicides since 2019, with most of the increases happening right after George Floyd died. And also, I mean, the city council did a number of catastrophic decisions to appease the demands of BLM supporters, Antifa militants. They didn't go as far as Minneapolis to abolish the police, but they did defund police and they demoralized the police. They, for example, lawmakers in the state made it so that police took away their ability to use a lot of crowd control tools, like pepper spray and tear gas. So a lot of you ask me, why don't the police respond to these riots that have happened like in the last year? Well, first, one of the main problems is an issue of resources as well. The police department is at historic low numbers, and they're not able to hire enough people that they're losing. So the city is just the police department is offering all these signing bonuses, a lot of money, and people aren't signing up for good reason. And this past week, there's been so much violence against the police officers by violent criminals on the street. Um, the police chief, Chuck Lavelle, weighed in very in a tweet, and he doesn't really give that many statements to the on his Twitter, but yeah. Um, okay. The violence shown last night toward officers over the weekend, and this is on July 26th that he tweeted, is shocking and reprehensible. In the last 4 days, officers have been shot at, had suspects fight with them, run over by a vehicle, and another almost run over. Officers are answering 911 emergency calls, trying to help people. They deserve to go home at night to their loved ones. They deserve and need the community's support as they continue to help make a difference in the city. The lack of support from the community makes actually a really big deal, because I mean, anytime that the police do anything, if they're just condemned, and then they're condemned by the mayor, who's the police commissioner, condemned by the media, it it creates low morale. And then, of course, another thing is, if you are unfortunate enough to be an officer involved in a shooting where you have to use potentially deadly force against a violent criminal who's trying to kill you or kill other people, then your case is automatically put forward to a grand jury, and a grand jury can choose to see if you are prosecuted for misconduct or homicide or any other. I mean, you can spend time in jail. So on Sunday, July 24th, there was a police officer involved shooting in Portland that was deadly. And just a few hours after that, there was an officer who was run over by a vehicle and very seriously injured. And that's happened. Another vehicle the same week tried to run over another officer. So this is just general criminality on the streets of carjackers and armed extremists, armed violent criminals, just kind of having a bit of full reign in the city. And I went on News Nation, and I was interviewed about the deadly officer-involved shooting in Portland. So I'm gonna play a bit of that interview. And unsurprisingly, Antifa have been protesting over the officer-involved shooting. So what happened is that early on Sunday morning, police received calls that there was a man and woman allegedly fighting. And so this was a domestic violence related type call that they were responding to in Portland. And when they got there, the suspect, a 19-year-old white man, refused to comply with orders. So they had to, when they were trying to arrest him, he was fighting. And then he got out his pistol and tried to shoot one of the officers in the head. And he missed really by just a tiny bit. And so there were two officers who were trying to make the arrest. The female officer then takes out her pistol and neutralizes the deadly threat coming from this domestic violence suspect. And he died on the scene. Police officer involved deaths in Portland are pretty uncommon. We average around 3 or 4 a year. And Portland is a city of the size of more than 600,000. So predictably, though, there's been a lot of anger in Portland over it. And the whole incident was caught on video, by the way, by Chris Ponte, who runs this YouTube channel called Cop Watcher. So I'm gonna play the news interview, and they're gonna play some of the video. It's censored, but it's still, if you're sensitive to this type of content, this is just a heads up.
We do want to turn now to the crime epidemic plaguing our cities. We should warn you, the video we're about to show you is graphic. Police in Portland responding to a domestic violence call over the weekend. And this is when the situation quickly escalates and turns dangerous. The suspect struggles with officers, pulls a firearm, and tries to shoot them. You can see what happens next.
Hey, you need help?
I'm going to pause that for just a moment. So you might have heard a gunshot go off. That first round came from the gun that's in the hand of the violent criminal suspect on the ground.
Help!
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Officer, you need help?
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Let it go! Let it go! Let it go! Let it go!
Just... Wow.
It is gut-wrenching to watch. The suspect not surrendering, and as soon as he fires the gun at police, a cascade of events clearly follows here. Notably, though, and what we're tracking tonight, many on social media firmly siding with the suspect here, despite the sequence of events. One saying liberals will watch the video and say, would you rather they let him shoot them first? Yes. Yes, I would have. The police probably escalated the situation, and he had every right to fight for his life. Another user announcing a vigil, boosting this call for a vigil where the Portland police murdered an individual last night. Shoot them first. Every right to fight. Murderers. Well, Andy No is an independent journalist. He's been tracking this, and he documents Antifa and anarchists, and he's the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And Daquan Bruce is the director of Concerned Communities for America, originally also from Chicago. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. And where we should note, there were 65 shootings, 5 fatal in Chicago in a weekend marked by multiple mass shootings, including a funeral. It is likely that you did not hear about this. It really didn't make much news. We will have more on that in just a moment. Andy, I do want to first go to you. We are tracking this major problem, shootings of unarmed black men. But in cases like this one, help us understand, is anti-cop sentiment so bad, this bad? How common is it for people to blame the cops first, even when the police get shot at?
That's actually quite common of the reaction you would find in places like Portland and Seattle and other predominantly left-wing or liberal cities in America. And it doesn't come down to just a matter of difference of opinions, whether one agrees or disagrees. The hatred that you see reflected in some of the social media responses also spews out into how the public responds on the street in the form of mass direct actions. And then in turn, city councils will respond to what they think are the wishes of the loud people out protesting. And I can say, as somebody who is from Portland, who's been on the ground reporting on crime now for years, the result is that it's caused violent crime and homicides to surge in Portland because the police are demoralized. They take early retirement. The Portland police right now are at historic low numbers. This is in the context of historic high homicides and killings. And we can point to all the decision-making from city council. After George Floyd died in 2020, when Portland had months of nightly rioting, the city council chose to abolish the gun violence reduction team, which was the unit of the Portland police tasked with responding to shootings, because the city council cited alleged racism, is baseless. And since then, the city council, the mayor, has continued to disparage its own police department. So retention has been a huge issue, and recruitment is another big issue. So the disturbing video that you just played just highlights how dangerous it is every night for law enforcement in Portland and other urban areas.
Well, and Daquan, I do want to bring you.
Yeah, so sort of breaking news from earlier today, I should say, is that, well, actually it was last night. So last night in Portland, Oregon, there was now another police-involved shooting, a deadly shooting. So within a period of 4 days of each other. There are now 2 officer-involved deadly encounters with violent criminal suspects. The details on this are really disturbing. There's no video as far as I know, but multiple residents in Southeast Portland had called police because a man was reportedly firing his pistol out into the street, and responding police were then reportedly shot at before returning fire and killing this individual. The individual has not been named yet. But this is just kind of highlighting this was a police press release, the really deteriorating conditions in Portland. And I'm going to pull up some of by the way, the victim in that, not the victim, I should say, the person who was killed in that shooting with police, in the video interview that I just played, he's now been identified. So I'm going to pull up his name and photo for you to see. Here we go. Jonathan Worth. He was only 19 years old. Not very much is known about him. I tried looking into his background. I couldn't find any like social media or anything like that. But the woman who was screaming in the video, she's in the hoodie here, was reportedly his girlfriend or partner. And this is a still, by the way, of the first round that went off. And in one of the other video camera angles from another Cop Watch live streamer, you see the fire from his handgun. And look how close that was to the officer's face. And this was him right after he was shot by the female officer. She's not in this frame, she's to the left. And her name is Mina Cavalli. She has another name, I forget. But anyway, that female officer has been placed on leave as a matter of policy, and the district attorney's office under Mike Schmidt will present the case to a grand jury. So, yeah, so I'm going to pull up some data about that report. That was, I think, the impetus for the mayor declaring a state of emergency. So here we go. This is a homicide rate in Portland from 2002 to 2021. There's 3 lines that are being charted here. The top one, green, is is that Portland? No, the top green one is the United States. By top, I mean, let's just look at the left side. Starting from the left side, you can see that top one that you see is the average of the United States. You can see it stays relatively straight, right? And there was a slight gradual decline, which is significant and important. Around 2011, still going down. It goes up. It ticks off by 2016. So in between that time, 2014 to 2016, the big thing there was the Ferguson stuff. And you'll remember the Ferguson effect, right? It was what was observed in the data there was this uptick in violent shootings and homicides in the United States. And this was also, when BLM became very big. And then there was a very big increase at the end, leading into 2020, George Floyd stuff. And then that other line that shoots way up, well, that's Portland. So look, Portland was below the national average, right, for decades. Our homicide rate was really low for the city of its size. And then look how high it is. It's even higher now because this doesn't even track up to like today. But that huge increase. And then the yellow line, the very bottom one, is Oregon. So Oregon's average homicide rate is really low. But Portland, wow, look at that at the end. Um, yeah, so with the declaration of the state of emergency by the mayor, Antifa have been furious about it, of course. Look at this response from this Antifa account, this racist effing S word. Um, the reason why Antifa don't want law enforcement in the state to respond to killings and homicides is because this death spiral is actually, in their minds, part of the agenda, part of the plan. They thrive when there's anarchy and chaos in the streets. And that's also, so in a way, you see when they take over a certain area or they have a lot of influence, like in these autonomous zones, that type of violence and anarchy that's observed there, that's what their ideology is. They view that society is better this way. It's okay if people die, it's okay if people get shot and killed. What's important is that the state is weak and unable to respond because it gives them power. It gives them this vacuum, half vacuum, I should say, to do what they want. Here's another account. F12, they wrote 12 is a number representing police from like gang talk, and Antifa have appropriated it. Nazi scum, and that's referencing the mayor's state of emergency declaration over gun violence. F this from this account with this communist symbol. This another account wrote, "We called Ted Wheeler mini effing Trump for a reason, clearly." So yeah, and Ted Wheeler is as far as can be from Donald Trump. I mean, Ted Wheeler went so far as to condemn the federal officers who were sent to Portland when the federal courthouse was subjected to an insurrection attempt by Antifa and BLM and all their supporters night after night in July. And the governor described those federal officers as Trump's secret police. And so, it doesn't matter. What my point is that it doesn't matter what you do to try to appease Antifa. If you're in government, it's never enough. What they want is for them to have full power, like in a tyrannical type of way. They want to be able to kill their opponents and targets with impunity. And at the moment, the reason why they don't view the state as legitimate is that the state often stops them if their violence reaches past a certain threshold. So in Portland, for the most part, the city's prosecutors have allowed them to occupy the streets illegally, to start fires on the streets, to set buildings on fire, to shoot fireworks and throw explosives at property. But if the Antifa, let's say, was to step up to the point of like homicides and killings, like they did do in Portland, and then the state authorities stepped in to respond to that by going on a manhunt for that Antifa member who fled, and then he died in a shootout with the police. But once a certain threshold is passed, then the state will step in. And Antifa are really furious about that. What they want is for them to have control over these state institutions so that they can, kill with impunity, appropriate people's property, and do it with the power of the military behind them, right? So they say they want to abolish, the institutions of the state. I think really more of what they want is they want the power that the state has. That's what they actually crave and desire. It's not truly creating this place that has, no government at all. Because if you go to any of their autonomous zones, whether they be like that hotel that they took over in Minneapolis, or the autonomous zone in Seattle in 2020, there was also, at the end of 2020, there was a autonomous zone in Portland, briefly lasted about a week, Red House Autonomous Zone in North Portland. the autonomous zone that's still happening in South Atlanta right now, the so-called Atlanta Forest. They have rules there, and they have a sort of like pseudo police force in a way. Of course, these fake police officers within the group are not properly trained in anything, but they go around like a gang of thugs, and they have warlord type figures rise up as well. That happened in Chaz. So it as far from utopia as can be, but they are still fighting for it, and they're willing to kill to try to achieve this goal. Last night I went on GB News, which is a new broadcast channel in the United Kingdom, and I was interviewed by the well-known Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage was the person who helped for years mainstream this idea of Brexit. Brexit, for those who are unfamiliar or have forgotten, Brexit was the movement, then campaign, and then a successful campaign, a referendum, I should say, to get the United Kingdom outside of the EU. And the reason why it mattered so much to those who advocated and believed in Brexit was because when you are a member state of the EU, you're now part of this sort of, it has both components of confederation and federation. These are sovereign independent nation states that are part of the EU, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Hungary, etc. But at the same time, a lot of legislation is made outside of these countries in Brussels. And so a lot of voters who live in these different countries feel disenfranchised, and that they don't have a say very much over legislation that is made outside of their country. And when you're a smaller country, like some countries in Europe are geographically small, population small as well, maybe it makes much more sense to be part of this union where there's an economic union in a way, or freedom of movement, like open borders. But like with the UK, it has its political history, cultural history, and all that has been one step removed from continental Europe. And so, so Brexit won in 2015, I think it was, and a lot of people went crazy over that. A lot of liberals, a lot of left-wing people, because they like this idea of, the idea of globalism, of internationalism really appeals to them. Anyways, Nigel Farage was probably one of the most important people in helping make sure that Brexit happened. Anyways, I had the pleasure and the privilege of being interviewed by him yesterday, and I talked a bit about the violence in Portland, in my hometown. So I'm going to play that clip.
Now, Portland, Oregon, you're way out there on the west. It's a fantastic, beautiful part of the world. And I'd imagine, a pretty fabulous place to grow up and to be educated. And yet, if we look at Portland, Oregon today, would it be fair to say that it's descended into a level of lawlessness that would have been incomprehensible even 10 years ago?
Yes, I think Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, is a microcosm of what happens when the policies that are inspired by so-called BLM and so-called anti-racism is instituted at a state level. What we've seen just since after George Floyd died is that the city is now experiencing historic surges in violent criminality, in homicides, in shootings. The mayor of Portland just last week declared a state of emergency over the number of people who have been shot and killed, because it's never been this high. Portland is just one of more than a dozen cities in the United States who are also experiencing similar trends towards
Yeah, I've got
violence.
friends in Chicago. You know, I was in commodities before I was involved in this politics and media world. And Chicago now, people don't go out at night. I mean, Chicago was, when I used to go to Chicago, it was the most amazing, fantastic social whirl of people. So it's happening all over America.
It is. And those who should be apologizing to the public over their demands of abolishing police, defunding police, demonizing police, well, they're nowhere to be found. In fact, many of them have dug into their heels and say that the reason why we're experiencing these higher numbers of deaths, predominantly of black and brown people, is because our agenda is not fully realized. In fact, we need to go further. It's not enough to defund the police. You have to abolish the police. And ultimately, if you go further and further into the goal, what they really want to do is to abolish the United States. They don't view the United States as a legitimate state. That's why they say it's systematically racist. It's on occupied land. They want to revise the history of the United States.
Oh, we're getting some of this over here too, Andy. Don't worry. You know, we're getting Churchill was awful and
Exactly. Courtesy of America. There's an export. That's what America's exporting around the world.
We catch everything from America. We get the good stuff and we get the bad stuff.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that interview, and you can watch the rest of it on, it was a long one, on GB News. And what I said there at the end, I said, when he was talking about how the UK has caught some of these ideological viruses from America, like BLM and others. I was very adamant in pushing down, this is an export of the United States. You see it also in other Western countries that have taken it in, that, America's soft power is in its culture, through its music, entertainment, film, art, celebrities, news. It has really big influence in the rest of the world, and a lot of Americans don't really realize that. Actually, you will if you travel and live extensively in other Western countries. The amount of American politics and issues that seeps into society, and it's. I think Americans. I feel personally ashamed that my country is exporting these SJW, CRT type of ideology into other parts of the world. And other places haven't experienced the same type of destruction from it as the US has, but it doesn't mean that these places are immune. The ideologies that we're confronted with now are specifically, born out of the American context, so it can really exploit weaknesses that that the adherents of these ideologies know clearly how to exploit. Certain aspects of American history, how to exploit the weaknesses of a compromised press, how to exploit big tech, the fact that big tech is systematically biased against or biased in favor of these leftist ideologies. It has a bit of a harder time navigating it in, let's say, in the UK or in France, but it's still trying, and it's causing a lot of damage. And so, gosh, okay. And speaking of the crisis in Portland, every week, every couple of weeks, we get some type of updates on those who are arrested in 2020 in Portland in the course of the riots and were prosecuted. So most of them escaped prosecution, but the few that did, over and over, we see they get their cases dismissed or dropped. And I have another update from one this week. This is the case of the suspect, Carly Ann Ballard, former suspect, I should say. So she was arrested at least 3 Antifa riots in Portland in 2020. and all of her local charges were dropped by District Attorney Mike Schmidt. However, she was federally charged. Okay, so this is a different agency, now this is federal prosecutors, federally charged for allegedly assaulting a federal officer. After the 6th of January, there were a lot of Democrats, for political reasons, then began venerating federal law enforcement. It's just for show. They really don't care if these officers are injured or hurt. But they care if they're injured or hurt by right-wingers. So it's a dishonest type of respect that you see many Democrats in Congress show. Anyways, so this Antifa alleged rioter had her case dismissed now, 2 years later. And here it is. Motion to dismiss complaint, United States of America versus Carly Ann Ballard. Yep. Another arrest from that same year, 2020. And by the way, she had also violated the conditions of her release from jail, because when she was federally charged back in 2020, this is the order here. It was ordered that she shall not enter within a 5-block radius of the U.S. courthouse, the federal courthouse that was under this attempted insurrection by the far left and Antifa. And well, she was arrested in the course of one of the riots that was in that area. So, didn't face any consequence. This was the third arrest. Okay. We hear a lot about mass shootings in America, but as I've discussed before, it's political rhetoric in a way, because mass shootings defined as where there are 4 or more people shot in one incident or connected incidents. And under that definition, we have a ton of mass shootings in the United States. But what gun control advocates don't feel comfortable talking about is that the overwhelming majority of these mass shootings are black on black violence in urban areas, usually involving groups or gangs. And did you hear that there was a mass shooting in LA last weekend? You probably didn't. So in San Pedro, LA, on Sunday, there were how many people? There were 7 people that were shot. 2 of them died, and 7 people that were injured. 7 people implicated. 5 were wounded. 2 were killed. There we go. No one was arrested as far as I know as of today. Maybe it's changed in the last 24 hours. But there was this interview from the local news station, KTLA, and I think it's so emblematic of this culture of violence and death that exists in some communities in America, where shootings are just a way of life. And it's really it's a separate discussion, I think, from gun violence, because it's entirely different than, let's say, a male youth or high school, or somebody in school going in and shooting up classmates, or targeting schools and stuff for shooting. That's a different type of mass shooting than the regular mass shootings that are involving gangs and predominantly Black communities. And unfortunately, Democrats don't feel comfortable talking about the majority of mass shootings for, well, you can probably guess why. Anyways, I'm gonna play an interview from this woman who says that her adopted son was one of the people who died. She gives a shout out to a gang in the middle of the interview, and it was just a bizarre clip, but I just thought it was so that more people should see it. Yeah.
It's the weekend, and I don't know. I can't speak for everybody else, but I'm from Santana Block Crip, so it's gonna do what it do.
Well, I hope your adoptive son is okay, that you're able to get a hold
but
of
I
him.
heard that he passed.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully that's not true, but it is. I'm so sorry.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
All right. So again, multiple people shot. We're told that at least 7 people were injured.
Yeah. So yeah, she gives a shout out to a gang, and I don't know what she's feeling, but at least in that interview, she didn't seem very sad that her adopted son had died. And I'm going to close out by playing another clip from my interview with Nigel Farage. Yeah. I think this interview, what I liked about it is that he asked me some tough questions. And by the way, you see this background? These are windows, and that's real. It's in a lot of studios, they're just LCD screens, but this was real. That's the Palace of Westminster in the background. That's Big Ben.
You. What was it specifically that politicized you?
Well, I started off as a student journalist at a university in Portland State, and I just wanted to report on what I was witnessing. I was working for the student newspaper when Trump was announced as the winner in 2016, and my city was on fire for several days. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets to declare that election illegitimate without evidence, and that
some would say that's happening this time round with Trump the other way, but hey, keep going.
They rioted for 3 days, and the response from the liberal establishment was that rage was legitimate, and political violence, when carried out for left-wing causes, is legitimate.
All about means and ends, yeah.
And I thought to just document the violence with my mobile phone and post it on social media. And eventually I learned very quickly about Antifa. And, I'm sitting in front of you today as an independent journalist, but according to my detractors, they say I'm one of the most dangerous people in America who has to be eliminated. And that's partially why we're doing this interview in London and me not in Portland, is because I've been subjected to so much violence against myself and death threats that it is very dangerous for me to be there.
Nothing justifies the death threats, the violence, and frankly, the fact that you've had to leave home and come to live in London for your own safety and for the safety of your family. I understand that and get that. But, Andy, I put it to you, you are quite an effective sort of agent provocateur, aren't you? And some of the people that you've been out with, mixed with, you've covered, whether it's the Proud Boys or groups like this, I mean, they're pretty far out there, aren't they?
Yeah, so I disagree with the characterization that I'm a provocateur. I think I have been on the ground covering brawls and riots and violence from people who of all political persuasions. And my detractors have sought to cast that as evidence that I was embedded or part of certain right-wing groups. I've always rejected that.
So would you argue then that when you attended, whether it's an Antifa demonstration or a Proud Boys demonstration, would you argue you were doing that as a journalist?
Absolutely. The footage all of it was posted on my social media. And nobody applies that same type of standard to, let's say, left-wing journalists who communicate and travel with Antifa Black Bloc groups. They're still given the label of journalists. I actually don't go with any group. I show up on my own. And because I'm neutral, actually, this is the main issue, is my detractors want to take me down because I refuse to condone political violence against the right, that somehow makes me then a supporter of right-wing extremism. It's absolutely untrue. Yeah. And another thing I would add to that, that I didn't get to say, is that the exposure of Antifa's criminality and extremism is viewed by them as a provocation. So you can go there, as I did with the camera, and say absolutely nothing, not interact with them in any way or anyone, and be labeled and perceived as a threat and a provocateur. And the thing is, this is in their own words, they view the camera as a weapon because it exposes who and what they actually are. So, okay, everyone. This is my Linktree where you can support me. Linktree, my username there is just Andy Ngo. So Linktree/Andy Ngo, and you can see all the places where, my website and my social media, how to get my book, by the way, on Antifa, and places where you can support my journalism. Please consider joining me on my locals or my Patreon. This, as I don't take any of your support for granted, and I really appreciate that. I don't take any of this for granted, and I'm so thankful that many of you choose to support me in a number of ways, whether it be on Locals or Patreon. So thank you for that. And if you're not already on there, please join. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. And I look forward to reading your responses. Okay. Goodbye. Have a good week.